Okay, I start. So, Richard Neutra, 1892. And also, please be kind and turn off the microphone if you have it opened. Thank you. So, Richard Neutra, who is actually a doctor honoris causa in Bucharest at the University of Architecture and Urbanism Ion Mincu. He received the doctor honoris causa in 1965. It's an impressive list, actually, with the recipients of this title in the school. Okay, 1892, 1970. So he was Richard Joseph Neutra, born April 8th, 1892. Was a Jewish Austrian American architect, living and building for the majority of his career in Southern California. He came to be considered among the most proeminent and important modernist architects. Not a little thing. This was the man. I have two more pictures with him. He seems like an interesting man, and I like his eyebrows, quite virile, and I like the expression of his face, you know, questioning, kind of in a Talmudic way, as also Louis Kahn recommended. Louis Kahn said, a question could be more beautiful than the most beautiful answer, and it's probably true. But unfortunately, some of us think that they know, so for them, the answers seem to be more important than the question. But the truly wise ones think otherwise. The question is more important than the answer. Anyway, he also had answers because his buildings are nothing else but answers. Although maybe I'm wrong, maybe his buildings or any building should have or should contain, to an extent at least, questions. I'm still impressed by his eyebrows. I mean, so black and thick. Anyway, some drawings by Richard Neutra. He did all kinds of renderings for his buildings, drawn manually, of course. His modernism is, I don't know very well how to describe it, you know, some kind of European organism brought to the western coast of the United States. He built many houses, private residences. Not only private residences, but the majority of his buildings do represent they are houses. Most of them opulent, you know, modernistic mid-century houses built in sometimes spectacular settings. I wonder how his architecture might have been if he remained in Austria and if he survived the Second World War, of course. That incredible calamity, which I hope will not reproduce itself. I don't know if you know, but a few years ago, well, maybe not so few, I forgot exactly, some 5-7 years ago, I launched a competition, a new birth house for Adolf Hitler in a town in Austria where he was born, to protest war through that house, because strangely, the house where the baby Adolf Hitler was born is still alive and doing well, and the Austrians don't know what to do with it. And so I launched a competition to transform the house somehow to protest war. And we received some interesting works. Maybe one day I will I will show them. But it still amazes me that Austria is still kind of, it seems, ambivalent, doesn't quite know what to do with that house. And while the house has no guilt, of course, it's symbolically charged because the baby, the baby Adolf Hitler was born there. Anyway, so renderings by Richard Neutra. You know, imagining houses for the you know, the affluent ones. He built also some apartment buildings on the west coast, and you are going to see them. Even a school or two. I guess this is it's either a school or a community center. He built a community center as well. So what do we see? We see an architecture which extends kind of optimistically towards the horizons, towards the cardinal points, and without too much, you know, inhibition, or without too much anticipating, you know, the crisis we are confronted with right now. Perhaps there was a certain optimism after the Second World War, where architects, you know, envisioned a rebirth of the world in a way, and some of his buildings seem to express that to an extent, although being an European, and also an European born in Austria and raised and educated in Austria, I'm sure he knew something about melancholia and even pessimism. He drew a lot. Okay, we'll go through some of his buildings. Actually, the list of his buildings is quite long. But look at those chairs, how they advance into the building through a perfect curve. Very strange. I wonder what that could have meant. Anyway, we begin with this home, Auerbacher home in Redlands, San Bernardino County, California. Yeah, these houses are very valued now, and big assets for the, you know, the auction the auction enterprises like Christie's and Sotheby's. So if you want to buy one, you do have to have a lot of cash. This mid-century modernism is very interesting. Clark House, Pasadena, California, 1957. There is not just the house, but also the landscape around the house, the garden, as you can see. And there seemed to be some influence coming from the East, from Asia, from the Orient, from Japan or China. This is noticeable in not only in his work, but also in the works of other architects from the West Coast. I don't know if this was done yet, but it's an interesting subject, I think, to compare the houses built on the East Coast of the United States and on the West Coast of the United States, let's say around the same time, because they are different. The house is built, for example, also for the rich and you know, for those who afford it in East Hampton or Southampton or Bridgehampton, New York, and other places, with those built on the West Coast. There are, it seems, almost two different kinds of modernisms: the modernism of the East Coast and the modernism of the West Coast. I lived for many years in New York, and I was quite familiar with you know, the mentality and the interest of the architects on the East Coast. And I have to say, I was very surprised that they were very emotional and interested in emotional towards the architecture from Europe, but not so much towards the architecture from within their own country. That is, I very rarely, if at all, I actually don't think I ever heard even a mention of Frank Lloyd Wright at Columbia University. You know, and this is strange, isn't it? But a lot of references to Le Corbusier, Mies, Terrani, many Europeans, of course, Mies immigrated to the United States, but still he was a European architect. Very strange that kind of organic architecture that Frank Lloyd Wright advocated and realized, built, left the East Coast, at least New York, rather indifferent. They were uncomfortable with Frank Lloyd Wright's architecture for some reason. Also, Sullivan was also ignored. Anyway, we are now on the West Coast, and indeed we see you know, this modernism without, you know, without doubts, in a way, that Richard Neutra promoted. Although I did mention that he had the expression of a Talmudic questioner, but his houses, I don't actually think too much doubting is in them. Constant Perkins' house from 1955. They are not arrogant houses. This I like about his architecture. It's not an arrogant architecture. Yes, even when he builds for the rich, he's not arrogant. There is a sense of limit somehow, even when the house is splendidly open towards the horizon. And you know, you look at this plan. Essentially, it's you know, it's a reticent plan. Whereas there is a wall here which seems to be, you know, to express a certain desire for a certain kind of freedom. But otherwise, the plan is rather contained and restrained. The swimming pools are sometimes not very restrained, but you know, those who afforded enjoyed having a nice big size swimming pool in the vicinity of the house. What else do we see here? We see the dimensioning of the parking place, you know, because you know the fetishism of the car, you know, was perhaps born in the United States, and at mid-century there was no reason to diminish it. So here there is room for at least 2-3 cars, and what can we say? Times are changing. I don't know if today we can still build in this way with garages for 3 cars. This kind of optimism, even if we think that you know, they are electrical, as we try to diminish our guilt. The truth is, even if they are electrical, they still consume energy, and it's not such an innocent energy as some might think. It's probably more innocent than gasoline, but or gas, but it's not totally innocent or pure. The truth is, things didn't change too much. We can still see buildings, maybe actually without this Cartesian exuberance, if I can call it so, on Arch Daily. You know, the language of modernism is still very much with us. And it amazes me actually how little we invent. If I look at the houses published on Arch Daily daily, I'm not surprised. I'm not, I see kind of the same old story, you know, houses done in a certain way. Very rarely I'm surprised, which shows that in the field of home, of house, we are still kind of unable to generate new paradigms. This is the model of the house. Richard Neutra. Leon Krier, of whom I talked, the other day, he said that Los Angeles is not a city, and I never visited Los Angeles, but from what I read and what I looked at, I would kind of agree with him. You know, the so-called city where everything is determined by the highway and the car. Indeed, does it qualify for being a city? Yes, it's a conglomerate, an agglomeration of cars and buildings and many people, yes, and pollution, let us not forget. But it is not probably a city in that sense in which we are accustomed to use the word. And what we see here is a house that contemplates from afar, from the top of a hill, that thing that we call the city of Los Angeles. The Cyclorama building at Gettysburg from 1966. This is a public building, it's not a private building. There was this optimism, 1966, the exploration of the sky, telescopes, panoramas derived from the New York International Exhibition from 1939, this global view where the United States was to perform a specific role of the country that shows the way, shows the light, but it proves that things are not so simple. And at this point, the very same country is leading all statistics with its terrible and unfortunate, of course, results, if I can call them rather cynically so, of the pandemic. So, yes, we explore the sky, we contemplate going to the moon and going to Mars, and Elon Musk makes extravagant proposals. Yet we are unable to defeat or contain a virus, and this should make us truly contemplate the limits of the human abilities and power. Because obviously we are not as powerful as we think. This virus, which is almost dead from what I read, is bringing us on our knees, including in our country, in Romania, which has now more cases than at the beginning of the pandemic. So much for the glory of the human spirit. We are limited, but within the limits we can achieve, when we are inspired, levels of excellence which should be appreciated and applauded, but without arrogance and without getting carried away, because it's very easy to get carried away, I think. Anyway, so a panorama, look at the plan. Yes, it's a plan that celebrates the conquest of the humankind, of the future in a way, and the future, nature, and so on. A student sent me today a picture with a project from Timișoara, a student project showing a greenhouse, and I'm asking myself, do we still need greenhouses? I mean, we incarcerate plants there when in fact we need those plants outside to generate oxygen, don't we? Why do we put the animals in the zoos and the plants inside greenhouses? Why? I mean, to to whose benefit do we do this? I think times changed. I think it's about time to allow the plants to allow nature to do what it's supposed to do, and stop this conquest of animal and plant alike. The human being is not the measure of all things any longer, if ever was. I mean, Winnie Mas, the partner in charge with design at MVRTV, even talks about outsmarting nature. What outsmarting nature? You know, I mean, these are almost, and I respect him and I like their works, but how could you talk about us outsmarting nature? If Frank Lloyd Wright was right when he said, he was asked, do you believe in God? And Frank Lloyd Wright said, I do, but I spell it nature. So considering what Wright said and reflecting on what Ma said, that, you know, outsmarting nature, this would mean outsmarting God. I mean, you know, really, you know, even if you don't believe in God, you wouldn't say something like this, you know. How could you outsmart nature? Obviously, we can't. A little almost dead virus brought the whole humanity at this point on our knees, and we still talk about outsmarting nature. Anyway, another house from 1962, this one in Switzerland. What can we say, you know? This kind of Californian design in Switzerland makes me smile a little bit, you know, and it is so different, this house, from what the Swiss themselves design. I mean, we know houses by, you know, various architects from Switzerland, you know, from Peter Zumthor to Olgiati to, I don't know, Peter Markle to Herzog and de Moron and so on. They have a different spirit. They don't have this. You won't see easily such a house built by a Swiss architect. No, but this man, you know, thought of building in Switzerland, which has a very different climate than the western side of the United States, doesn't it? I mean, here you think you are, you know, in Palm Springs, California, or I don't know where, but let us contemplate that snow there on top of the mountain. And what does that snow have to do with these large pieces of glass? You know, is it appropriate to build in this way, in this climate? I'm not convinced about this. But architects, despite the universally acclaimed wisdom, they are very often naive and sometimes arrogant. You know, who cares about this snow here? We have air conditioning, we have central heating. We can do everything. In the winter, this could be very, very warm inside this house. And in the summer, it could be very cold because, again, we have the air conditioning, we have the technological means to conquer, to outsmart nature. But we pay the price for that outsmarting of nature because the temperatures are going up. I understood that last year was the hottest year in the history of humankind. And we still, you know, think that we can resolve all problems. But I'm not so convinced. Although it's interesting in this picture, this sculpture here, and then the shadow of the one who took the picture, I imagine. And you know, here you have this hand, arm, and here you have these hands, arms. And although this is kind of strange here, you know, I don't quite understand how these hands, they seem to be legs and ending up with being hands. Anyway, swimming pool again, you know, going inside the house and outside of the house, you know, for those who would like to decide to swim inside the house or outside the house. You know, the rivers are drying, but we are bringing the swimming pools closer and closer to our homes. And what can I say? Yes, luxe, calme et volupté, la joie de vivre. Indeed, it is. How does Switzerland make its money? Well, it seems through the banking system mostly, and selling astronomically charged watches. LK Apartments, Los Angeles, 1948. So my presentation is not quite in a chronological order, and I apologize for this, but we'll still have, I think, a rather comprehensive view of the works of this architect, Richard Neutra, Doctor Honoris Causa et UAUIE. This is a recent, rather recent picture, and yeah, it's fine. It's fine. What can we say? Anyone would love to live here, you know, and you have 4 garages there. Now it's an apartment house, you know, it's called an apartment. I imagine there are a few apartments, maybe 2 apartments or 4 at the most. It doesn't look, I mean, it doesn't look like a block of flats at all. Emerson Community Charter School, 1937, 1938, Los Angeles. I mean, this luminous solar modernism, you know, before the Second World War was, I would say, rather new, no? I mean, you know, 1938. So this was built 10 years after Villa Savoye. And, but it's a public building as opposed to Villa Savoye. And this is the kind of building that would still be built today, 80 years later, almost. So Nuitra did something that was not too conditioned of the time he built in, it seems. I like this, and this I suggest we should practice it to be in a circle. Students and professors, you know, to be in a circle, as opposed to aligned with a focal perspectival center, you know, where the king or the lord or the professor sits, because in a circle there is an obvious equality. I mean, if it is a circle and nobody sits in the center of the circle, I truly think it changes the dialogue that you are having with the others if you sit in a circle, as opposed to, you know, hierarchically, you know, oriented towards a focal point at, you know, at the end of the classroom or whatever. But we don't practice too often this kind of sitting in a circle, and this is sad, actually. Jardinette Apartments, Hollywood, 1928. Again, this was the year when Villa Savoye was built. So I don't even know, maybe he was aware of Le Corbusier's work at that time, but this is again a public building, it's not a private house. It's easier, it was, I imagine, easier to build a private house, a manifesto house, than an apartment building. But look, 1928, an apartment building that even today, you know, you could build it just as it is, and nobody would say it's anachronistic. In fact, it looked even more somehow modernistic or radical at the time when it was built than now, because of the colors, and I don't know, it's something about it. This is an important house by him from 1946. The Kaufman Desert House is one of his most important buildings in Palm Springs, California, and it epitomizes all his aesthetic. You know, it's including the big rocks, because there are big rocks in the vicinity of his houses. His houses represent use a luminous Cartesian, rectangular architecture with a lot of glass, but the rocks seem to try to balance that situation somehow. And I like rocks in general. I think we need rocks. Now, of course, again, the swimming pool is the swimming pool. It's not for someone really, I think, who goes to work every day from 9 to 5 and maybe works also overtime or in the weekends. This is for someone who who can swim a lot. And you cannot really both work and swim. You either do one or the other. Anyway, life can be good indeed. But it seems the almost dead virus is not too seduced by or frightened by the beauty and the serenity of such a place, and probably would attack it in equal terms with what it usually does with everybody. Although from what I read in the United States, those most affected by the virus were the blacks and the minorities, because they didn't have vacation houses to escape to, and they didn't have maybe enough education to protect themselves and so on. Big problems in that rich country. But it's a rich country with very few, I mean, not so few, but no, a few considering the majority of people. Very few, very rich, and then very many who are struggling. It has been said that the United States doesn't have any longer a middle class, and it is diminishing with great speed, the middle class. And there are many people who live under the level of poverty. So they certainly could not have commissioned Richard Neutra to build something like this. No way. It's a good building though, but when you think also about larger context, both aesthetical and ethical, you wonder, if you see it isolated like this, this is a house in the desert, right? No house to the left, no house to the right, no house at the top, and no house at the bottom. As if this house lived somehow outside almost outside of life. This is a very famous picture. It has been published in countless times in various books. And it's a perfect picture in black and white, showing the joy of living in opulence. And look at that person there contemplating the swimming pool, and everything is fine. It's everything. Could one get sick of too much happiness? I think yes, it's possible. Just like when eating great birthday cake and you eat too much and it's too good and then you feel sick. It's possible that this is also true in the case of such living. Anyway, maybe I'm just a little bit envious. It's possible. I just try to imagine a person, for example, this one, getting up and going into the house, and you notice she has, if indeed is a she, I think she is, a mask on her face. What does that mask represent? The building is not masked, but our faces are masked because we are afraid of the virus. And it's a strange contradiction. The house is more and more open, and we are more and more masked because the kind of freedom the house symbolizes, we cannot afford any longer. In fact, this house seems to say the more distancing, the more open and intimate we are with everything that surrounds us, the better. But there are limits again. And I suggest to you there is an interesting book about architecture called The Power of Limits. is a book that can be purchased. It can be found. The Power of Limits. Okay, look at the size of the swimming pool, right? I mean, that's almost an Olympic size. Not that I know much about swimming pools, I don't. Now I wonder, I don't know if it's Richard Neutra. Maybe yes, maybe not. Anyway, it's a good house, of course. It's a fine house. I still think the swimming pool is a little bit too big for my taste, but I may be subjective. As the rocks seem to be also a little big, you know, he somehow seemed to compensate the bigness, or to balance the bigness of the swimming pool with the bigness of the rocks. They certainly were not brought here by hand. Now they had to have certain vehicles to carry such big stones to bring them in the vicinity of the Cartesian house of the, of the exuberant Austrian or European. Now, it's possible this picture is from a Hollywood movie. I don't know, but it's something about it, because some of these houses were present in more or less famous Hollywood movies. After all, is where Hollywood resides. And maybe she's not Brigitte Bardot, but she was filmed by Godard on top of, and also inside the Malaparte building in Italy. Anyway, yes, looking at this picture, one would say happiness does exist, beauty does exist, sensuality does exist, rocks do exist, Cartesian, architecture does exist in harmony with everything mentioned above, but the Talmudic questions still loom. Anyway, moving forward with the Kaufman House, which is one of his emblematic buildings, Richard Neutra, in California. It doesn't matter during the day or in the morning or at night or in the evening, the building is proclaiming for all to hear, life is good, and beauty does exist, comfort does exist, and swimming is a pleasure one should not deny himself or herself. Nice. This could be also on the moon, no? Or on Mars, although there are the problems there, of course, because of the lack of sufficient gravity and oxygen and so on. It amazes me how much interest is now in escaping the Earth, to go there in the blackness of the unknown and to start anew after we almost ruined the Earth. We are eager now to leave, and I'm perplexed by the desire of the most accomplished, in a way, man on earth, meaning the founder of eBay, the founder of Amazon, Elon Musk. They all want to leave Earth, and I don't understand why, because they achieved everything on this earth: fame, money, you name it. And they all want to leave Earth. It means they are not happy on Earth. How else could I interpret this desire to move away from the Earth? Now, this is for some reason I included when I made this presentation today. I mean, now I just amplified it, but I allow this building to, because I show so many residences, I want to show this building by Zaha Hadid, which is her only private house, as opposed to Richard Neutra, who built so many. Zaha built only one, this one for an eccentric Russian. I told her, meaning the client, I want to wake up in the morning and I want to just see blue sky. There, talking about, escaping me. I just want to see blue sky. I don't want to see any neighbors, and I want to feel free. Sounds familiar? Recalls Doronin in a new video discussing the project. She told me, Zaha, do you realize you have to be above the trees and she just took a napkin and drew the sketch. I looked and I said, I liked it, and this is how we started the Capitol Hill project. And this is the house. Would we call it a home? I'm not so sure. Yes, it's a building, but I don't know. I'm not a domestic person at all. It's enough for you to take a glimpse at my kitchen and you'd understand immediately. But I don't think this is truly a home. If a home is that place where a dog loves to sleep, I don't know if a dog would feel at home here. Anyway, yeah, it's an interesting building, very different from Richard Neutra's, but I don't know if it is a home. And this business with, going higher than the trees also amplifies my angst, because I think a sense of home is not truly, I don't believe in this kind of outsmarting nature. No. Anyway, the man wanted to be free. It means his billions didn't provide him that freedom. Why is it so? We search for freedom even when we have everything. And what is freedom, actually? Maybe we should ask ourselves, what is freedom? Maybe he himself, like Elon Musk and the other two great founders of the capitalistic enterprises called eBay and Amazon, aspire towards. He seems to aspire towards. He actually, in my opinion, if I am to be an amateur psychoanalyst, he's running away from himself, which shows clearly that accumulating a great wealth is not necessarily a great victory, and is certainly not providing that freedom that we all want to have. It's very possible that a yogi, being totally static under a tree, would achieve much more freedom than this man employing Zaha Hadid and having the riches he has. All these futuristic longings are illusions. And yes, there is a lot of work here and ingenuity, and but I mentioned this before. If we look at the section of the house and we look at the size of the car, what is all this big platform from which the house emphatically emerges? I mean, you would say this is the parking, the underground of a large public building, not a house. When I look at this section, it would never cross my mind that this is a home for a single man, maybe with a girlfriend or several, but it is a house. It's not a civic building. And despite the fact that I admire Zaha, I think this building, I don't think he knew how to design a house or a home. And maybe because herself didn't experience what a home, what a family is. I understood she didn't have a kitchen in her apartment in London. Strange. Kelton Apartments, Los Angeles, back to Richard Neutra, back to the same kind of aesthetics, but in this case more restrained because it's an apartment building. It's not a single home in, contemplating the mountains. Maybe there are two apartments here. That's what I seem to see, no more than two. Interesting that it is called an apartment building. In other countries, this would have been called a two-family house. But in the States, where the feeling for individuality is so high, to have two apartments, two houses would mean already an apartment building. It's not really an apartment building. Anyway, Cronish House, Beverly Hills, California. Not bad, but this is Beverly Hills. So that, you know, it's a privileged place, isn't it? Not that they don't have crimes there, they do. They do because, you know, the angelic side of the human being is not capable of controlling always the devilish side or the demonic side. Doesn't matter the opulence of your surroundings at all. There were shootings taking place in the most opulent spaces and in the most opulent empires, and in the case of emperors and queens and kings and so on. The human drama continues. What about the building? Sure, why not? We can do it, right? We can have huge surfaces of glass. No problem. We have air conditioning, we have central heating. There is no problem. Now, to have such a house in Beverly Hills, to have just a hut in Beverly Hills would be quite something, but to have such a house in Beverly Hills, obviously this was not for everybody. But who lives in these houses? Probably some kind of speculator. My father used to have a saying, if you work, you have no time to earn. And in the paradox, there is some truth, I think. If you work from 9 to 5, you cannot buy such a house. It's a different kind of man who can build such a house and purchase such a house. Anyway, and it's not arrogant actually. It's a big house, but I wouldn't call it arrogant. Maybe those large pieces of glass are a little bit arrogant, but at that time, people didn't care too much about sustainability, ecology, and such trivial matters. We saw actually this before. Anyway, the landscape is very nice, though. I mean, these plants are planted with knowledge and sensitivity. Landfair Apartments from 1937. This is indeed more like an apartment building. Here also a lot of glass. The demagogy of glass is still seducing at that time, was still seducing, and it still does to this present. It amazes me how towers being built today with a lot of glass all around them are claimed to be energy efficient and sustainable by the most important firms, from Sir Norman Foster to Zaha Hadid Architects. They still build towers totally covered in glass with no windows that open, and they claim the buildings are sustainable and energy efficient and all the rest. This is simply not so. They use a technology that consumes a lot of energy. So, if you have a building where you can't even open the window, please don't claim that building is sustainable, please, because it is a lie. But they can afford it, of course. Plus, we don't even think any longer of opening windows for office towers. No, that would be out of this world, would be inconceivable. Well, it would be extremely extravagant. What do you mean to open the window, for a large office building? No way. But here, in the case of an apartment building, you see the tool used to bring water to the plants. Here is a different story, and you see that here there are windows that open, but it's still a lot of glass, because yes, the glass gives us the illusion that we are free or freer, but are we? because I think freedom is mostly of an inner order. You know, it's not of an external. Well, it is sometimes, of course, but as I said, the yogi doesn't move at all, and I think the freedom the yogi achieves is higher than the one that is than Philip Johnson in his glass house, for example. Anyway, another apartment building, and now the Los Angeles County Hall of Records. We talked about office buildings, so there, it's an office building by Richard Neutra. Here also a lot of glass, because glass is good, or was good. But he also employs, as you see, you know, opaque walls. I wonder what is here, you know, so much opacity. This, in a way, represent the big rocks that were present in the proximity of his private residences. I guess he had a liking also for the other side. So as opposed to the glass, the rock, the opaque blank wall, monumental and so on. Maybe too monumental. Anyway, what can we say? It's a good building, but Lovell House, this is one of his most important houses, 1928, again, the same year when Villa Savoie was built by the one who changed his name to Le Corbusier. The one who, as opposed to his cousin, Pierre Gendret, chose to serve the Vichy government during the Second World War, a government which was subservient to the Nazis. And Le Corbusier and his cousin, Pierre Gendret, had a fight about it, and they broke off. They broke up. And in this respect, I admire more the cousin, Pierre Gendret, who registered to be part of the French resistance. Unlike his more, Le Corbusier, more cowardly relative, Le Corbusier, who explicitly was on the side of the Vichy government, which was in complicity with the Nazis. So there, with all the greatness of Le Corbusier, in some respects, his more modest and unknown cousin, Pierre Gendret, was more noble and more heroic, actually. Anyway, moving forward, without too many Talmudic questions, I like the becoming of the house, you know, the structure, the engineering, the steel that in its ethereal beauty, to me, is very attractive, maybe more than the final house. What if the house remained just as we look at here? Just the dream of a house, the intention of a house, which it's in its incompleteness somehow evokes more the infinite than this one. This one, it's true, it's very, very difficult to make a house to honor both being and becoming. This is about becoming. This is about being. It's crystallized. But as the Turks say, the Turkish people, they have a saying, when the house is ready, meaning when it is complete, here comes death. So maybe the Turks knew something, that there is something about, concluding a project, that what could follow after this? Either you go to Mars or Moon, or you succumb to the finality of life, which is death. Sorry for this maybe morbid interpretation, but yes, it's difficult in architecture to serve both being and becoming. It's very difficult, but I think the great buildings somehow achieve this. Interesting details here, so to speak, you know, what's going on here. Like the elements are already beginning to attack the pristine beauty of the building. Here is restored. quickly hiding away what once was threatening the perfection. The Garden Grove Community Church. It's a church. I hope no theologian from the Romanian Orthodox community is here, because if he was, um, I almost said he or she, as is the custom today, but no, we cannot mention a she in the field of Orthodox theology. No, they can only be men, of course, all virtuous and righteous and so on. Although enjoying wine and good food, and they have, it seems, plenty in many places. Anyway, this church would have provoked some palpitations to the Orthodox theologian. Look at this, it's everything the Catedrala Neamului is not. What can I say? Although the cars probably are not very different from the cars which will be accommodated in the basement of Catedrala Neamului, all for the glory of God, of course. I like this building actually by Richard Neutra. Now that cross maybe is a little bit too big there, too ostentatious, if I can say so. But the architecture is, mildly religious, if at all, and I think it has some qualities as a building. Now, of course, the Orthodox would say this is not a church. I don't know. Richard Neutra thought otherwise, and so did the people, that community which built it. After all, the aspiration towards God, shouldn't it be, put it simply, architecturally expressed, a stair, an ascending? No, that's what it is, an ascension. You ascend towards God. And symbolically, that stair seems to say so, silently. Now you look at the car, that's the kind of car that, mid-century America was very happy to promote. Forever optimistic and progressivist. No one would build such a house these days, such a car these days. Times changed. But there are interesting things here. I do believe a church in particular should be creative. And if it's not, sorry for being brutal linguistically, I think we are betraying God. If we are not creative building a church, we are betraying the one who resembles us, in the sense that we resemble him. Because if man was made in the image of God and the resemblance of God, and if God was creative, then the human being should be creative too, no? And not find refuge in unacceptable dogmas, as we do here. Miller House, Palm Springs. Sounds good, no? Palm Springs. The house is not as subtle and so complex and so interesting as the Kaufman House, but the magnificence of the mountains and even the magnificence of the rocks, again, in the proximity of the house, make the house acceptable. But I don't think it's more than that, acceptable. It's a smaller house, of course, a more modest house, but the landscape is equally magnificent. Although inside there are some splendors, I mean, I can only imagine myself, laying on this chair, if I can call it so, and yeah, I mean, even the bedroom has some inviolable qualities. Although you wonder, why this is for a single person. It seems because usually a bed, in such a house has access from both sides. This one has, or unless Richard Neutra indulge in a kinky kind of thinking here, where both, let's say, both owners of the house would climb into the bed from one side, which is possible, a little bit sadistic, but it's possible. This is a picture. Apparently, this house was destined to disappear, to be demolished, and this picture was taken at that time, but apparently it was saved. Anyway, Kaufman House, this one we saw. Sorry, I don't know why it's shown twice, but maybe other pictures. For example, this one we didn't see previously, or I wanted to compare it with the other house. This is one of his quintessential works, no doubt. I mean, if you see this or something like it, it's probably Richard Neutra. And this is, the rendering in a, kind of happy-go-lucky way of this, rather vast house with an even vaster swimming pool. His son as an architect as well. This is the last image of the presentation on Richard Neutra, and I kind of felt that I should end the presentation with a picture with his son, also an architect. Here he is. Time passes. This man is already himself old. His father died, and I like his room. I like his desk. I like, the humanity. And what can we say? Life is indeed short. And maybe ars longa vita brevis. Art is long and life is short. Although Levi-Strauss thought that is the other way around, that life is long and art is short. Okay, we'll go now to Kisho Kurokawa, a Japanese architect of some importance. And maybe my expression is not the most adequate. He was very important. And he even visited Bucharest and the university in Bucharest. So it is his birthday as well. Kisho Kurokawa. 1934, 2007. So he died at 73. An interesting man. And I mentioned this before. Professor at the university in Bucharest, Dan Coma, told me that when he visited Bucharest, the professors in one atelier at least, they created 2 rows with projects, one with the best projects, with the best grades, and another row with less fortunate projects with the worst grades. And that Kisho Kurokawa looked at the works for a few minutes, and when he exited the atelier, he said, I will hire all these people with the worst grades. And I don't know if it was just his sense of justice or equilibrium or balance, or he understood that among those students who appear to be, the worst, there was talent, there was inspiration, there was something which the grades didn't reflect and honor. And I would say that Kurokawa was probably right. An uncertainty, these are his words, an uncertainty about existence, a lack of faith in the visible, a suspicion of the eternal. Now, to talk about uncertainty is to talk about those doubting or those doubts that Stephen Hall mentioned in his book called Urbanisms, with an S at the end, meaning a plural, urbanism, working with doubts, something we forget to do. And I mentioned the Talmudic questioning when I talked about Richard Neutra. Now here we see Kurokawa talking about the uncertainty related to existence, a lack of faith in the visible. And he was an artist of the visible, an architect who worked with visual matter, yet he understood that behind the visible there is the invisible, which is sometimes equally important, if not more important. Maybe Einstein had the same thing in mind when he said, in life what counts cannot be counted, and what can be counted doesn't count. And unfortunately, we are so seduced by the visible. The so-called primitive man thought that the eye belongs to the devil, is a devilish organ. And in a way, the so-called primitive man was right, because the eye is very voracious and very egocentric, wants the whole reality to belongs to itself, to the eye, to its majesty, the eye. But there are other senses, are they not? And yeah, a lack of faith in the visible shows to me an architect who understood also the metaphysical side of architecture, the one we copiously neglect. And I think that's a mistake. If we deprive architecture of its metaphysical content, we impoverish it fatally. As a, you know, the suspicion of the eternal, I guess it's a suspicion of the demagogy related to the word eternal. Because I think an architect, I mean, but what we see here in these three thoughts, an uncertainty about existence, a lack of faith in the visible, a suspicion of the eternal. In all three, there is some kind of a negation, an uncertainty, a lack, and a suspicion. So it seems Kurokawa was a friend of the word no, as opposed to Bjarke Ingels, who is a friend of the word yes. He even said it, yes is more. But I don't truly believe that art and architecture and certainly life are just about yes. They are also about no. And we see in the case of Kurokawa an awareness about this no, an uncertainty, a lack, and a suspicion. The principles of the metabolist revolved around ideas of impermanence and change. And as the name suggests, the movement was intended to have more in common with natural processes. Kurokawa was considered the metabolist, a group of those heroic Japanese who wanted to change the world and who wanted to bring architecture closer to the biological processes. In essence, closer to nature. Each one a hero, the philosophy of symbiosis. Well, yeah, it sounds good, but it's not so common to come across heroes, although potentially it's possible that we are all heroes or could be heroes, but in the end, at the end of the day, only some of us are. 1997, he published this, each one a hero, the philosophy of symbiosis. He struggled to get commissions early in his career and was so poor, I'm talking about Kurokawa, that he made his models from noodles, photographed them after they were dry, and then cooked and ate them. Beautiful. I mean, here we have a major architect who couldn't do models, neglecting what he was eating, so he made them of noodles. Why not? I find this actually very sustainable and enlightening and amusing at the same time. Would be models made of noodles accepted in the school here? Of course not. Everybody would laugh off such a thing. Well, Kurokawa did it. He ate his models. He ate the noodles after he photographed them. Very, very nice. Kurokawa, who was fluent in English, was an articulate advocate and a prolific writer of deeply philosophical books that discuss the age of life rather than the age of the machine. Here was the man, the poor man, the young man, tenacious Japanese man, as they usually are, the Japanese, and he succeeded. And I think we can learn a lot from the Japanese. They are not very tall in general, and they even live the longest lives. There is the longest longevity in Japan, and I wonder why, because they work the hardest. So it seems hard work actually prolongs life. It doesn't diminish it. This was his wife, a beautiful wife, an actress. So the poor man who became a famous architect didn't turn his back on the feminine beauty. So this was her name, Ayako Wakao. And was a Japanese actress. Maybe she's still alive. It's possible. Wakao began her career contracted to Dae, whatever. Here she is. So certain people in this world succeed in everything they do. Significant architecture, a great marriage, and so on. Here he is playing with a model in his office. So he founded the metabolism movement in 1960. This I actually didn't know. I didn't know he was the founder, or maybe he was the founder with other people. The key principle being symbiosis. Let us think about this word, symbiosis. Is it mentioned in our architecture schools? Of course not. We only mention analysis, 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 analyzer. No symbiosis, and in other words, no wholeness, no interconnectedness, just analysis. But analysis is not enough. As you can see, the key principle was symbiosis, not analysis. When are we going to learn that without synthesis, we cannot have analysis? Analysis by itself is irrelevant. You analyze, you analyze, you analyze, but if you don't bring the things together in some kind of a synthesis, into some kind of symbiosis, you fail as in your role of connecting your building within and without. Moving away from the centralized prototype of the European city, centralized squares, for example, it was a radical vision of cities without centers, a web of decentralized cells or modules. Metabolism proposed building spaces and structures in relation to metabolistic structures, which constantly undergo the process of growth, change, circulation, and recycling. It was a symbiosis of culture, design, and nature, a biological, relative, and variable model versus modernism, a mechanical, industrial model. Japan's new National Art Center. Here he is in his older age. He was a modernist, and as you can see, his building was thoroughly modern, but he was dressed like an old Japanese from a different century. And I like this fact that there is no contradiction. Actually, you can marry the past with the present and even the future. And I think I have a picture here also with him with a sword, like a samurai. But the art center that he built is thoroughly modern, isn't it? It's nice. Architecture is nice when it's creative and where you can be playful and express your ideas with courage, with inspiration, with poetry. Then architecture is truly something to love. But when it is contrived and defeated by rules and regulations, by obsolete mentalities, then it becomes a pain, a suffering, a dull suffering. As Frank Lloyd Wright himself said, that his memory of the university years, and he didn't spend too much in a university, In fact, he didn't even study in a university. He studied in some kind of a technical school, and not even architecture school, but some kind of an engineering school for 2 years. And even so, he declared that his memory of the university years were just dull pain. That's what he said, Frank Lloyd Wright. And he moved away from the pain. And I wouldn't blame him, actually. Anyway, back to Kishio Kurokawa and his symbiosis. Hello, Mr. Kurokawa. Happy birthday to you. I wouldn't play games with you. I can see clearly the term samurai in you. Yeah, a big forehead. They say that a big forehead is a sign of intelligence. It might be true. Anyway, this is the capsule in his tower that he built in Tokyo, and we are going to see other pictures with it. It's a minimal space, for the future. But, you know, this is what you see in magazines and blogs and websites. But the reality of life is different. You know, this is a bed which is very similar to a bed in many countries of the world, rich or poor. Yes, the facade, the window is futuristic, is round, is executed probably in a perfect way. The wind doesn't go through it, the cold doesn't go through it. It's a great industrial product, but look at the disorder on the bed and the, you know, everything that belongs and what's going on here. You know, you would say this is not Japan. It is Japan, and you see other things from this glorious tower. You look at it from the outside and you see indeed a big yes. Hello, Mr. Bjarke Ingels, a big yes to future. But we look here at the realities of human life as lived, and it doesn't seem so glorious, does it? Anyway, we're moving forward, and these are the capsules prefabricated and brought to the site by machineries. And at one point they were white, kind of like this, you know, and clean, but then in time became less clean. Here is the samurai, the author. Hello, Mr. Kurokawa, happy birthday to you. I envy your forehead. Mine is not so generous as yours, nor my coiffure. But we are back to the capsule tower. Look at this. You know, welcome to a different kind of Japan. I like this man. He's probably a wise man, wiser than I am. That's for sure. But look where he lives. You know, this is a space. I mean, truly, to say that it's minimal is perhaps not to say enough. It's he's inside Kurokawa's building, which is futuristic and all. But what we see here is an older man, with his monitor there and the mouse and all the rest. And, the paraphernalia of domesticity that we all have to live with. What can we do? Yes, from the outside, you say this is the future. And this is the future in terms of the plan of the building. You know, you understand its scale when you contemplate the door, the entrance door. I mean, you almost jump into the bed. And he does have a bathroom, and here there are accommodations for, to cook something, and why not? So this was built by the metabolist searching for symbiosis, Kisho Kurokawa, yes, the Japanese experiment a lot. As opposed to us, they experiment a lot. And bravo to them. This is cleaner, a cleaner interior, but equally narrow. There are books, maybe a student is here. But we'll see a few other pictures with this interesting project by Kurokawa. This does look a little bit space age, indeed. It does. I don't know. Maybe the rent is high there, or I don't know. Hello. How are you today? Life is as it is. He even has his bikes inside his cell. Of course, to bring in some bananas, it wouldn't be a big deal. But the bike and the luggage, and the man is ready. He's ready to go. This is just a transition, right? Of course, even in Japan, the curtain doesn't always work perfectly. You see here something. There is something a little bit out of the norms of perfect design. This happens to me all the time, so that's why I'm sympathetic. But it seems it doesn't matter. You are in Tokyo, or you are in Bucharest, or I don't know where. Imperfections happen because life is like that, just imperfect. What can we do? Look at this. Hanging the clothes here, and disorder. Yes, Japan has disorder. We only see the perfection of Katsura Palace and tatami rooms, and everything is perfect and clean. But the reality of life, again, is not so different from other places, as you can see here. It's disorder on the desk, on the bed. In fact, the bed is even unusable. You know, you have to remove these things in order to be able to sleep. And the chair is almost bigger than the bed. So, Nakagin Capsule Tower, Kisho Kurokawa, Tokyo. Look again. Whoever lives here places the towels just as I do. I have a bigger space than this person, and yet somehow I do this thing. I put the towels on top of the door. You know, so it's nothing new in the world, really. It's not. I mean, he has a laptop just like I do, and maybe he's an architecture student. Here I seem to see some kind of projects, no? Uh, yes. Actually, these pictures make me feel good because I see the symbiosis. I see the connection between one country in Europe and one country in Asia. We are all humans. Now, this man, does he look Japanese? I don't know. Maybe they just rent. Maybe if you go to Tokyo when the pandemic ends, you can rent a capsule for a few nights. Maybe it's possible. It doesn't look like a Japanese, unless I don't see very well with my inappropriate glasses, which is very possible. Anyway, the tower during construction, metabolism, optimism, and know-how. The helix city. The man was a visionary. He promoted utopian urbanism, and you know, at that time there wasn't so much twisting around as it is now. Today, many architects twist a lot, twist their structures, but because for Kurokawa and his metabolist friends, the connection between architecture and biology was important. That's what we have here, the double helix of DNA and so on. So it's architecture and biology. They dreamt. This is what Japan became famous for. And they were able to implement some of the dreams, something we don't do. We don't dream. We don't have utopian schemes. We don't think of the future. We only think of the present, the narrow little present that we live in. That's not what they did. He proposed this and built the resource center in Hawaii, the Dreamland, Hawaii Dreamland in Yamagata. I'm a little bit confused. Is Yamagata in Hawaii or just it is called this building, the Resource Center Hawaii Dreamland in 1967. I like the plan very much. It's almost like a sand painting by the Aboriginal population of Australia. It's quite nice. It's abstract, it's organic, and he built it. He built it because when you have dreams and you believe in them and you fight for them, there is a chance you might succeed. If you don't have dreams, then architecture is a theater stage setting where the leading actors are the people. And to dramatically direct the dialogue between these people and space is the technique of design. Kisho Kurokawa. Yes. And there was a heroic architecture and a heroic time for architecture. We should acknowledge it. And we should acknowledge it maybe with even more persistence, considering that we don't talk about a heroic architecture any longer. We don't talk and think of heroes. But I think we do need heroes, not arrogant heroes, not those with a big chest, you know, but inflated egos, but modest heroes. I think we need inspiration. And where should the inspiration come from? So he planned several units like this, if I can call one of these buildings a unit. But he built only one. It's a beautiful plan, and I like even this rendering of it, of the plan. It's almost like, I don't know, you know, this is almost like a fetus inside the uterus, the womb, and you do feel the presence of biology somehow here. Interesting plan, yes. Now, The Yamagata Hawaii Dreamland, a resort center in an island city, was a miniature megastructure by Kurokawa. The design concept evolved from the architect's theoretical project Metamorphoses from 1965, which envisioned an organic city consisting of a number of interlocking loops, each forming a self-contained urban quarter. When the city expanded, it would grow simply by adding more loops, mimicking the duplication of cells. As a result, the city would stretch out in a natural linear pattern distinct from both the radial form of most existing cities and the rigid linear configuration of the earlier megaforms like Kenzo Tange's Tokyo Bay project. Metamorphosis, a nice word, confirmed Kurokawa's commitment to the architecture of life. Yes, life. The loop was first employed in a master plan for Kishino New Town in Aichi, which was organized into 3 loop-shaped residential districts with civic and commercial facilities located along their interfaces. Design concept description by Kisho Kurokawa. This building is based on a metabolic architecture of cell. It is also a ring architecture, loop architecture of circulation. Architecture of no center is another manifesto of the age of life. An agricultural city, which would be very, very relevant to our time. 1960, Kisho Kurokawa. You see, the architect is also an urban planner and an urban dreamer. Something also that is not encouraged here and now and should be, because it would be beautiful when the architect is encouraged to think out of the box and to think out of the specificities of his immediate role and expand his knowledge and his imagination to something which in the end anyway relates to architecture, and more than that is architecture. Japanese architect Kisho Kurokawa designed in 1960 the agricultural city, intended for the replacement of the agricultural towns in Aichi destroyed by the Ise-Bay typhoon in 1959. So let us not forget, Japan is not a country which doesn't know the problems that arise from a furious nature. It knows them very well, and still this country builds in a very audacious and enlightened way. And we learn from them, we can learn from them. The accommodation was to be raised above the ground to deal with future flooding. The grid was intended to be between 300 and 500 meters. Kurokawa challenged the assumption that the city and the country need be in antagonism. I totally agree. There is no need at all for an antagonism between the city and the rural, between urbanism and ruralism. Quite the opposite. The more they are seen as being together, the better. But here he was a utopian thinker, so to speak. There is a beautiful book in Romania, which can be found extremely inexpensive at a second-hand bookstore. It's called Cetatea Ideală by Grigore Arbore. I recommend that book to anyone. You can buy it with even less than 2 lei, and it's a great book about the utopian dreaming, about the city. Cetatea Ideală, yes, it even has a nice title, I would say. Yes, why are we not encouraged as architects to think about Cetatea Ideală? Why not? Kurokawa did, and his friends, the other metabolists did, including the great Kenzo Tange. So why can't we? This is a house which is modernistic, but is also obviously connected with old Japan, with tradition. I like his expression here. He's a man who made it. He's a man who ate noodles as a student because he couldn't afford to buy polyester or I don't know what, and so he made his model some noodles, and after he photographed the model, he ate and cooked. He cooked and ate the noodles. Nice. Um, of course, he has all the sympathy in the world from me because this idea that he would hire everybody who had bad grades in Minku shows to me that there is hope in the universe. The Toshiba IHI pavilion at the Osaka Expo from 1970. Look at this. Look at what he built. Now, some I think is a little bit monstrous, technologically speaking, a little bit too much surrealism, but also surrealism. Yeah, maybe, but they kept experimenting and they keep experimenting. These Japanese, very much anchored in a technology that they tried their best to absorb, to know, and to apply. Something we don't do, although we could do. Anyway, the house that we saw the models previously, it's what is it? It's a house, it's a temple, it's both. It's both old and new. And this is the change Japan has, which has a very significant past and also significant mythology, which they didn't forget. So even if they become adventurous in the most technological and futuristic way, they are still anchored in a past that legitimizes the high flying. It's important. Now this is sorry, it's a different title for the same work. A cancer caring center in Swansea, in southwest Wales. It's a spiral, right? It's a spiral. It's again connected to biology, to the processes of life, and to what he called the architecture of life, as opposed to the architecture of dogma and non-life, which is so present in so many parts of the world, unfortunately. It's a cancer center, but I think the spiral in its dynamic form gives hope. That it makes you think. It might be wishful thinking, but maybe it's more than wishful thinking. It makes you think that things can be turned around, because this is what the spiral does, because the spiral is about becoming, not about being, but about becoming. That's why maybe James Joyce was happy when Brancusi drew his portrait at his request as a spiral. It is about becoming. So things can be changed around. The Nagoya City Art Museum from 1983, 1987. This building, I don't find it so glorious. It's a little bit predictably, a little bit postmodern, using these words in the pejorative sense. What can we say? He began to have very large commissions, and very many, and some buildings are a little bit facile, I would say. I would include this one in this category. But he built it. He built it, and it has some interesting parts, but I don't consider these interesting parts being of a very deep nature. We saw this one at the Osaka Expo. Now the Van Gogh Museum in the extension, it's a wing in Amsterdam, which I actually saw with my own eyes. It has even initially this part was not built, was built afterwards, also based on the design of the Kisho Kurokawa architects. Um, the great painter, no, the great painter who maybe didn't even have the noodles that Kisho Kurokawa had when, as a student, he made his models of those noodles. Yes, this unbelievable painter, Vincent van Gogh, who sold only one painting all his life with the equivalent of $5, and now his paintings sell for more than $100 million. But forget about how they sell, the intensity, the beauty, the drama of his paintings move perhaps more than the paintings of anyone else. Plus, at the level of his biography, I think Vincent van Gogh comes closer to The Idiot by Dostoevsky, who actually tried to depict here on earth Christ or Jesus. There is something about Vincent van Gogh, and everybody knows, that story where he cut his ear when he ran after his friend Paul Gauguin, whom he valued very much and respected. And just before reaching Paul Gauguin, he turned his knife towards himself and cut his ear. I have an interpretation about this. I don't know if I'm correct. I'm not a great reader of the Bible, but I read somewhere that apparently the soldier who entrapped Jesus in those times, afterwards, out of guilt, cut his ear. So himself. So I'm thinking that Vincent van Gogh, in the terror of that moment, maybe unconsciously he reproduced something that he knew, because before he painted, he was actually a preacher, and he was so exalted in his preaching that the church fired him. He was preaching to the miners, and so I'm thinking in that tumultuous and tragic evening when he ran after his friend Paul Gauguin to murder him, and then he turned against himself and cut his ear with the knife he was having in his own hand. I don't know. I just thought of telling you about this because we are dealing truly with a phenomenon. Vincent van Gogh was a phenomenon. A total devotion to art. Yes, he died young, but he didn't die. We keep talking about him, and his paintings are incredible depictions of a life lived intensely. On a personal level, but also on a cosmic level. So to make a museum for Vincent van Gogh was not an easy task. It was an honor. I wish, I wish I had this honor to build a building for Vincent van Gogh. I didn't, and I will never have it. But Kisho Kurokawa had it in Amsterdam, and this is the building he built. Initially, it was like this, and then later on they added this part, also based on the designs of Kisho Kurokawa. Now, if Vincent van Gogh didn't paint any painting and he just wrote the letters to his, most of them to his brother Theo, he would have deserved a significant role, a position in the history of culture. I suggest to anyone who is interested in Vincent van Gogh to get a book with these letters. They are beautiful. They are beautiful, these letters. They are very, very human, very modest, and they are not pessimistic. They are truly saying yes to life without anything rhetorical or demagogical. Truly, this man was equally great in his correspondence. So yes, Scrisori, or the letters of Vincent van Gogh, there is such a book, and it can be found easily, and it's truly worthy of being read. This is a sculpture by Richard Serra, the North American sculptor who works with rusted iron. Anyway, we do need art, of course. What would life be without art? In my opinion, there's a little bit too much glass here. I have a problem with it, but at the time when the building was built, I guess it was more okay than now. The National Ethnology Museum in Osaka, an interesting building from 1977. You know, the functionalist might say, wait a minute, you know, why do we need so many stairs? You know, and where are the parapets and where are they leading? Where are they going? Of course, there is an inspiration here coming from India. But, you know, architecture is not just about, you know, counting little functions and so on. It's about symbolism and expression and, you know, metaphors. In fact, those make architecture architecture. Otherwise, it would remain just the level, the banal level of being a building. It's very possible without this, what is above here would have been much less significant, and maybe it would have been just a building. Exactly that side, which seems to be useless, exactly that side lifts the building above its level and it arrives at being architecture. In a certain way, again, John Ruskin was right. In nature, what is the most beautiful is also the most useless. And he gave the example of the tail of the peacock and the lily. But the functionalist doesn't understand this now. He doesn't care about the tail of the peacock nor about the lily. The Osaka Expo, the Takara Beautillion Pavilion, also built by him, a little bit different from the previous one that we saw. But we see again here the metabolist belief in biological processes and in interconnectedness, and unfortunately, maybe too explicitly, in systems. But you see the concern for becoming, because these things point, just like a library that Arata Isozaki built in the 1950s, you know, they represent a possible connection, connecting with other structures in the future, extending beyond the being of their time and place. This is about becoming again, and not just being. Otherwise, in my opinion, the systemic reality of the building is a little bit problematic because it's a little bit too deterministic, too willful. But this is metabolism in architecture. Kisho Kurokawa. In Tokyo, Japan, there are too many people and not enough space. So what do architects do? They maximize on that space, creating trendy and affordable micro apartments. Now, this is not done by Kurokawa, by Arakawa and his partner, an apartment building in Tokyo. You know, again, those who think that architecture can only be square and rectangular and gray are wrong. Here we have color and we don't have squares, or we have squares too and cubes, but we also have cylinders. And there is a playfulness here that brings joy to the setting and to life and to architecture. Here is a man in an extremely minimal space, isn't it? I mean, you know, but these Japanese living in such spaces, they reinvent the world. You know, this is a paradox somehow. You know, I wonder if these Japanese, you know, squeezed between those two worlds that are so close to each other, didn't contribute to the world more than the inhabitant of the Kaufman House by Richard Neutra, with its immense swimming pool and large spaces and glass walls and so on. Look at them here. You know, they're happy. You don't need a lot, actually. You don't need a lot of space. You know, you can even have the ceiling at 1 meter above you, like here. It's okay. It's okay, at least for a while. It's okay. They laugh, they think, they wear eyeglasses, and I mean one of them, and they probably read books. Life can find compensations in many ways, really. And look at him here. You could say he's a masochist. Well, what can you do when the rents are so high in Tokyo? So there, you can be happy even in a closet. And he is living in a closet. I live myself kind of like this in Paris, in an attic in a building near l'Assemblée Nationale, near Place de la Concorde. In the attic was a chambre de bonne, a room for a servant. And I was living alone there in an attic, and I opened the door and I jumped into the bed. It was almost all the room was just the bed. And there was also a little bit, little table. It even had a little shower space and a little kitchenette. Very, very, very small, kind of like this. The rent was affordable, so that's why I rented it for a year, and I don't regret. Uh, what I'm saying is you don't need really large spaces. It also depends on the context, right? If you are across the Seine from the Louvre, who cares that you have to climb 7 floors because there was no elevator in that old French building? There was no elevator, and I was living in the attic in the 7th floor. So going up without an elevator, it's okay. Yes, you felt a little bit discouraged to leave your little room because then you had to come back to climbing 7 floors. But it was a good exercise. The Museum of Modern Art, Saitama. Here we also see the greed. There is not just biology, but there is also the greed. That greed that Peter Eisenhower thought is unavoidable when you start a project. I am not convinced at all is unavoidable. Function as a criterion in architecture achieved many things, but it also resulted in the articulation and concretization of space. In the process of providing rationally and clearly articulated spaces, the virtues of nebulous and undifferentiated space that naturally exist between demarcated areas was totally neglected. Spaces which might embrace 2 or more meanings were eliminated in functional architecture. I totally agree. And I regret that here now probably people who advocate and teach dogmatically functionalism. He's totally right. Functionalism eliminated anything that might be ambiguous or even apparently unusable, eliminated exactly those spaces that Fujimoto refers to when he talked about between function and no function. Those spaces which, descriptively named not functional, they could have a function that is not anticipated by the architect. That's it. So he's totally right, Kurokawa, that spaces which might embrace 2 or more meanings were eliminated in functional architecture. Functional architecture is very simplistic. It tries to control everything through anticipated end results. We know exactly this space is for the circulation, this space is for sleeping, this space is for the refrigerator, this space is for the piano, this space is for whatever. Everything is described and prescribed, and there is no room for freedom, for inventiveness, for allowing the user to invent a function or to use a certain space for something of which the architect didn't think. I'm a great adversary of the simplistic and banal understanding of what functionalism is or might be or should be. And I'm lucky that Kurokawa was too. Intercultural architecture. Are we thinking of it? No. Are we thinking of the philosophy of symbiosis? No. No. We are interested only in analysis, analysis, analysis. No symbiosis, no synthesis at all. The philosophy of symbiosis. Kishore Kurokawa. The Kuala Lumpur International Airport, great airport, he built it. He built many buildings. And in fact, here I show only some of them, but We are dealing with a force in architecture. A force enlightened enough to understand that a student with bad grades is not necessarily a bad student or a bad future architect. Yes, he understood this, something which the school systems do not understand. So they discriminate them. They segregate the students, the so-called good ones and the so-called bad ones, forgetting that many important architects actually were not great students. And I can name some of the most important ones, starting maybe with Antoni Gaudi, who was considered a less than mediocre student. And we are talking about Antoni Gaudi. So there, of course, Antoni Gaudi would not have received financial aid from the government. Now, he would not have deserved it, right? I mean, the creator of Sagrada Familia and Park Güell would not have deserved the financial aid from the government. No, because he was a bad student, a poor student with bad results. If by results we mean grades, the terrorizing grades. Okay, the airport by Kurokawa, extending his metabolist ideas at the level of an airport. And when everything is an invention, of course, architecture becomes a joy to practice. Hello, Mr. Kurokawa. You do look good. I understand your beautiful wife falling in love with you. She had an intuition that, in fact, you would become even more beautiful as time passed, because I think he actually looks better at the end of his life than at the beginning somehow. Only certifying that what Picasso said, that it takes a long time to become young. And as Le Corbusier said, the problem in life is not to remain children, but to become children. And Brunkush said, when we are not children any longer, we are dead. Unfortunately, the schools of architecture don't understand this. They don't understand that when the students are childlike and they enjoy what they do and they are playful, they are actually at their best. They don't understand this, and in a morose way, they punish them. Here is the samurai. Hello, Mr. Kurokawa. I still envy your forehead and your sword, of course. And now the Capsule House, which is similar in a way to the Capsule Tower, but this is an individual, a private house. In my opinion, a little bit too willful. But this side exists in China, this fascination with technology, with capsules, with modules. After all, even the tatami room is a modular room. Yes, there is here maybe a little bit of naive optimism, but maybe all optimism is naive, including the one based on technology. This is the plan of the house. Again, the conventional professor would condemn the presence of the bathroom in the elevation. How could this be possible? No? Well, it's possible, as we can see. It's very possible. And I don't think it's the greatest sin on earth at all. So we have man and we have nature. We have the capsules and we have the trees. The Museum of Modern Art in Wakayama. I mean, this man was blessed, of course. I mean, he was the author of his blessings. He had the commissions all over the world and of all kinds, museums, airports, private houses, cultural centers, you name it. It does pay to take risks. Headquarters of the Japanese Red Cross Society, 1975-1977. Here we have some kind of insinuation of what I meant by the word becoming, because these things that come towards us so audaciously do seem to evoke possible growth. Osaka City, Osaka, Walter Gropius. in the Bauhaus Manifesto in 1919 said, together we will want, think up and create the new building of the future, which will be everything in one shape, architecture and sculpture and painting, which from millions of hands of craftsmen will rise once towards the heavens as a crystal symbol of a new coming faith. You know, we think of the Bauhaus as being a functionalist kind of an international style school. Well, wait a minute, this is a fragment of a mystical manifesto. And its last word is faith. And he talks about, you know, the millions of hands of craftsmen, creating the crystal symbol. This is an exalted language, isn't it? So why do I mention it? Because it's again about symbiosis. It's about bringing together painting, sculpture, architecture to create that crystal symbol of, well, not necessarily the new coming faith, but of a life lived of interconnectedness. And, you know, this building by Kurokawa is different from what Gropius would do or did, but I see it as an example of a vigorous modern architect who understood that although he was anchored in the traditions of his country, he understood that only moving forward and using you know, the discoveries of the newest discoveries, this moving forward is the only way to work. I never visited Tokyo. I wish I did, but from what I know about it, is a city of continuous discovery and renewal. Bernard Tschumi said that he liked much more Tokyo and New York than Paris, because Paris is kind of, you know, stuck in its Osmanian centrality and the dogma of the L'Arc de Triomphe and the centrality of, I mean, the converging of all the streets towards a so-called monument. Tokyo and New York are more dynamic and without explicit centers. Now, a Museum of Science from 1991 to 1994, also in Japan. Sometimes, although he claimed that he was against the center, well, the pyramid is almost a paradigm of the center. So I'm not so sure that a samurai, Kisho Kurokawa, was totally an adversary of what is called the center. I mean, here we have two explicit centers, paradigmatic centers, the sphere or part of a sphere, and the pyramid, the cone. So the explicitness of the geometries refer, in my opinion, to the idea of a center. But even if they are pushed a little bit aside, they are strong enough to evoke centers or a center. Otherwise, the spiral again is fighting its fight with being as a symbol of becoming, just as it does at the Guggenheim Museum by Frank Lloyd Wright, which is also about becoming. The Melbourne Central project in Melbourne. Here again, we have the pyramid, the cone pyramid, quite strong, although it is in glass. A folding chair. We are approaching the end of the presentation. I usually, when the architect is also a designer, I show at the end a few furniture designs or object designs. So this is a folding chair, but is it really a chair? I mean, it is, but it's more like a throne, you know, and it shows in a way his ambivalence towards, on one hand, he wants the democracy of folding and even the democracy of the humbleness of the word chair. But if we look at the back of the chair, it belongs to the realm of thrones. and the realm of those chairs that Charles Mackintosh designed with maybe similar longings. A fractal chair, and not dissimilar from the so-called folding one. Interesting, sculptural. I'm not so sure how comfortable, probably quite uncomfortable. I'm not sure that these curves truly serve the back of anyone. But as an object to look at is fine, as long as you don't sit on it for too long. It's a sculpture, essentially. And I think this is the last picture of the presentation with an older Kisho Kurokawa, who probably had as a dream to be a samurai, and he realized his, at least at the level of appearance, realized this dream when he was 70 something. Thank you very much, and happy birthday, Kisho Kurokawa, and happy birthday, Richard Neutra.